My name is Gomulkiewicz. I'm the Dean of College and Academic Advising here at the Bear Creek School. And it is my privilege that I get to work with our 11th and 12th grade families as students are finishing up their Bear Creek experience. And I work with families on thinking through what courses they should be taking, what courses students should be taking, and then on what their college process should look like. I myself am actually an alumni of the Bear Creek School. I went to Davidson College in North Carolina for my undergraduate degree, and then more recently I completed my master's in higher education administration with a focus in college admissions from Georgetown University. So I really love this stuff, and I nerd out on the college admissions process. So the goals for tonight are to give a brief overview of higher education. Many of you have attended presentations of mine before, and I do like to always start with this because it's a really critical piece of situating where we are in the college landscape. So I won't belabor it, I promise, but it is really important that we're all on the same page to understand how we got where we are today. But then the majority of the time will be spent on discussing common myths, those 5 top myths, and then on providing accurate resources. So as you leave tonight, you all can, when you encounter these myths in your own life, you have some resources to search for solutions and to fact check those myths. So starting off with the landscape of higher education, there's 4 really critical trends that have occurred basically since the 1940s and 1960s when the GI Bill was passed in the United States. This had a huge impact on many things, including the landscape of higher education. So what happened? The first thing is that the number of colleges in the United States, the number of physical colleges, increased. So more institutions were opening, and therefore, that meant that, in large part, more students were attending college. And that's a little bit of a chicken and egg phenomenon, right? Were more colleges opening and more students attending, or were more students attending because more colleges were opening? But either way, both of these things were increasing basically at the same time over that period. Additionally, the cost of higher education was also skyrocketing. So since 1980, the cost of higher education on average has gone up over 1,000%. And inflation is only about less than 250%, still significant, but the reason I mention that is the cost has been increasing at a much more significant rate. And then lastly, the acceptance rates across higher education have decreased. So cost, number of colleges, number of students attending, all pretty significant upward trends, but acceptance rates are a pretty significant downward trend. And since this chart was created, those numbers have continued to decrease, so acceptance rates overall have continued to go down, especially since COVID, and we'll talk about why that is later in the presentation. But it's important to know that this is a trend not just across what would be considered the highly selective colleges like Harvard, but also across a range of different types of schools as well. So what does this mean? Why do I start with this information? Well, it means that the scope of college admissions is much broader than it used to be. And this sets the stage for a lot of information and misinformation about the process. And so it's really important for us to refocus on what is the ultimate goal of college admissions as we roll into this presentation, because I find oftentimes that gets lost. What in the end do colleges want out of this process? Why do they even do this process? I was talking to a student today and I said if it was just about GPA, they don't need college admissions officers, right? All they need is an algorithm that pulls the kids with the top 2 GPAs from each school, or the top 10%, or the top 20, right? It's not that simple. So why isn't it? Why is there this whole big, sometimes confusing process? The reason is because the goal of college admissions is ultimately for the college to shape their community. They want to ensure that the students they admit will be successful in their program. They want to ensure the students that they admit will be engaged with their community. They want to ensure that the students they admit are serving their institutional mission. And that varies school per school on what that is. And they want to ensure that they are building a balanced and diverse class. And when I say the word diverse in college admissions, everyone automatically thinks of race and ethnicity. If you've been following the news over the last year or so, you know that the Supreme Court ruled that race and ethnicity can no longer be an independent factor considered in the college process. But that's actually not what I mean when I say diversity. There's so many ways that diversity is categorized in the college process. Things like geography, things like a student's background, things like interests, right? I always say you can't have 2,000 tuba players at the same college, right? You want tuba players, you want flute players, you want violinists, viols, right? That's how you build a robust orchestra. It's the same thing with the college process. So those are all things, gender is another piece of the diversity pie. So those are all the types of things, and there's many, many more factors that fall into that, but essentially colleges want a representative class. So it's important as we move forward today with the information that we keep that in mind, that this is the goal of the process. It's not to confuse families, although it often does. It's not to stress out students, although it often does. And it's not to drive admissions counselors crazy, although it always does. But it really is to help those colleges achieve their mission. So it's my role, and parents, it's your role to help support our kids in that process of understanding and demystifying what the college admissions process looks like. So there's a lot of myths that I've heard, but the reason I picked these 5 is they are the ones I hear most frequently. So families come into my office all the time saying these things or asking me about these things. I see these mentioned in the news. I heard just the other day from a student in the hallway about this, about one of these myths. And so that's why I picked these, is they're the ones I hear the most frequently and I think are sort of the most embedded in our cultural landscape. And I want to be very clear that it's okay if you believe one of these myths. If you walked in tonight and you see one of the slides come up and you're like, gosh, I thought that was true. That's why they're common myths, right? Is there's a lot of information out there that makes them seem like the truth. And so I want to be clear about that, but my goal is to give you those resources to understand why those are not the truth and to understand how they became the truth, but more importantly, what the reality is. So with that in mind, let's start with the first myth. This myth is that grades are everything. In the college admissions process, it is most important that a student has a perfect GPA, a 4.0, a 5.0, all A's, whatever that looks like, that the student with the best GPA will get into the best colleges. And that if a student does not have a perfect GPA or a lower GPA, they will not be able to get a good college education. So what causes this myth? In my opinion, and this is backed up by research, this is caused by increased competitiveness of the college process, right? And so students feel this pressure of, we hear a lot of good students are applying, so surely the only way to get in is to be perfect academically and to have the best grades possible. But that's not the reality. The reality is colleges value students who challenge themselves. Sometimes students will come into my office and they'll say they're protecting their perfect GPA, right? They're like, what's the minimum number of classes I can take so I can keep my 4.0 GPA? Because that's the most important thing. And I have to remind them, it's not. Colleges want to understand the rigor of your high school program and how you've taken advantage of those opportunities. So what does that mean? What does rigor mean when we think about a high school? Well, the one that most families think about immediately is AP classes. That is one way to show rigor. If you're not familiar with the AP program, those are college-level classes that you take as a high school student. But it's not the only way to show increased rigor in high school. Another way to do so is to make sure that you are exceeding the graduation requirements in various subject areas. So at Bear Creek, does anyone know how many years of foreign language is required in the upper school? Anyone? 3, we have a 3 up front. Anyone else have a guess? 4, you all are so optimistic. It's 2. 2 years of foreign language are required in the upper school. As an advisor, though, when I'm talking to juniors, I want to talk to them about, are there benefits to taking 3 years? Why might you consider that, both from a perspective of being a well-rounded student, but also from a college perspective? So there are reasons why students should not take more than 2 years of language. So it's not every time, right? It's personalized. But for a lot of students, I would encourage them to at least take that 3rd year to exceed that minimum graduation requirement. The same thing for subjects like math, science, arts, right? We have minimum requirements of that, but how are students going above and beyond what the minimum requirements are that we expect as a school? In terms of English, that's a state requirement and a Bear Creek requirement, 4 years of English, so no one's going easy on those English requirements. But it's not just exceeding those graduation requirements, it's also taking a diverse range of classes, right? Sometimes students look at me and they say, I don't need an elective class. I'm not really that interested in graphic design or strength training or technical theater or studio art or choir. And what I would challenge them with is try it, try something. Search for those classes, because that is taking advantage of the educational experience here. That is taking advantage of the rigor that we offer at Bear Creek. So it's not just those core classes. It's not just packing your schedule with APs. It's really looking at how you have taken advantage of the educational opportunities at Bear Creek. This is data that the college collects from us, and I am responsible in my letter. I write a letter for every single senior when they apply to colleges, and that is a personalized letter where I contextualize, in part, there's other things that go into the letter, where I contextualize that student's rigor within our school and within their class. So that's one of the critical ways that colleges understand this information. And I promise this is backed up by data, so I want to show you some of the data for those of you who like charts and graphs. So this is from the national, it's called NACAC. It's the National Association of College Admissions Professionals. And so it's basically those of us that work on the high school side, and then also those who read the applications on the college side. We come together in a conference every year. We share data, we share trends, and we talk about how we can work better together to service the students that we work with. So basically what this chart is showing is that if you look at the considerable importance, moderate importance, limited, and no importance, the top 3 factors that colleges look at are grades and strength of program, right? And the majority of colleges are considering those as the top factors. Essentially, colleges are asking the question, again, back to their mission, what kind of student will they be when they get to our campus? Will they be successful in our program? Will they be engaged with our curriculum? Will they be able to keep up with the rigor of our program? Okay, the second myth is I need to participate in 20 activities or clubs, and I probably should have changed that to 30, 40, 50, who knows how many as I can cram into my schedule. I hear this a lot from students and also parents as well. And there's a reason for this myth as well, right? Colleges began discussing this idea of the well-rounded student. Raise your hand if you've ever heard that term, well-rounded. No one, okay. Okay, a couple people. So the idea of this came about right around that passing of the GI Bill that I talked about earlier. And colleges started using this term basically to indicate that the only factor that they were considering was no longer academic aptitude, that they also wanted to look at the character of the student. They wanted to look at the involvement of the student. It wasn't just a numbers game. And so because of that, this term came about. It was further reinforced due to the pushback against standardized testing and many groups saying that standardized testing is not a valuable or an equitable way to measure applicants. And so instead, colleges leaned into this idea of the well-rounded student. But what that translated to, what families heard, what students heard, was to get into college, I have to do as many things as possible because I have to look as well-rounded as possible. But again, that's not what colleges want, and that's not what they meant. Colleges want to understand a student's passions. That's the truth. Colleges ask the question, how will this student contribute to our community? Are they an athlete? Are they a comedian? Are they a reader? Are they an artist? Are they an entrepreneur? Right? So when we think about that, when we contextualize it within what type of community the college wants to build, we understand that this does not have to do with doing everything, but rather doing a few things well and significantly. Recent research by Darling, Caldwell, and Smith showed that what colleges are looking for in students' passions when they say well-rounded, they're looking for activities and investment that is authentic, that is quality, and that is meaningful. So can a student articulate why they volunteered on the weekend? Or was it because my parents told me it would look good on my resume? Can they articulate why it was important that they play basketball, even though they were only ever on the JV squad? Can they articulate why they started a club at school and how they have a plan for that to continue forward? Or was it just because they heard that leadership was something good to have on your application? Understanding a student's authentic connection to their activities, no matter what those are, that's what the colleges want to see. They want to understand what that student has done, why it matters to them, with the hope that that activity or something similar will become a part of what the student brings to their community. Interestingly, research also shows that students that have those types of activities that are authentic, quality, and meaningful, that students with significant extracurricular passions statistically have stronger grades, show a more positive perception of the value of school, and generally have higher academic ambitions. College admissions offices, they read this data. So if that's what the data is telling them, it's an added benefit of looking for students with those investments. So what does this actually look like? Well, in middle school, this means it's a time for students to be broad, to explore interests. I would encourage middle school students, sign up for the volleyball team, try cross country. I was talking to a middle school student that did track and field, and she said to me, I will never do that again. And I said, that's okay. Now you know you don't like track and field, right? Sign up for band, sign up for choir, take an art class, try creative writing, volunteer at the library. There's so many things you can do, but middle school is a great time to try all sorts of different things. And then as students transition into upper school, they should start dedicating more significant time towards the activities that they love. That could be one thing, that could be a few, or that could be many. But it doesn't have to be and shouldn't be everything. Depth is far more important than breadth in terms of activities. So just a few examples. Let's say things like athletics, I always feel like are easier, right? You can find ways to engage, but sometimes students then get stuck. They're like, I play soccer, I love soccer, but what else I can do? What else can I do? There's so many opportunities at Bear Creek and in the community to get plugged in with local youth soccer camps. Maybe you look at an opportunity to be like an assistant shadow coach for a youth soccer team in the area. Maybe you sign up to be a volunteer coach for a summer camp, right? These are all ways that you can get involved with soccer outside of just playing it. Maybe your student or your child is a reader, someone that would rather spend the evening with their nose in a book rather than hanging out with their friends outside. There's so many great ways to demonstrate a passion for reading. First of all, keep reading, right? That's something you can talk about on your college applications. But what about volunteering to help in the library, either school or local library? What about helping volunteer with the lower school reading program? What about starting a blog or a YouTube channel where you review books? What about taking a stab at writing your own short novel or poetry? Those are all ways you can deepen that passion for reading. Or programming. What about students that are really interested in computer science? There's so many cool opportunities to design websites and games, to self-study different programming languages, to take summer camps, to volunteer either for those summer camps or to take them yourselves. So whatever your passion is, I hope that demonstrates how you can take that and then deepen and invest. So if well-rounded wasn't enough, there's now a new term that's been coming to light called angular. And there's downsides to this term, the same way there is with well-rounded. But what angular is trying to articulate is that colleges want students who don't have a surface-level commitment to activities, but someone who plans to continue to pursue those passions in college. So like a triangle, they maybe have 3 things that are really pointy, that are really strong, where they've shown depth, as opposed to the beach ball, where nothing is deeper than anything else. Okay, the third myth is that college reputation is everything. Where does this myth come from? This one, again, goes back to the history of colleges, which is why I start there. As the number of colleges increased, they had a question, right? Which is, how do we differentiate ourselves from the other 5 colleges within the state? The other 10 colleges, the other 15 colleges, the other 20 colleges within the state, right? And then as the colleges started differentiating themselves, the same question came to students who were looking at colleges. How do I differentiate between all of these different schools out there? How do I understand what is worth the best value because college is more expensive? And so that's really where this ranking system came from, was to help families differentiate between colleges and to help colleges be able to differentiate themselves. U.S. News and World Report is the gold standard as far as rankings. So if you've heard of college rankings, there are other platforms, but this is kind of the main one that's out there. And I want to be clear that ranking is not inherently bad or wrong, but there are some incredibly dangerous pitfalls that can come along with ranking. So it's important to understand that colleges work tirelessly to improve their standings in the rankings by maximizing specific criteria. I've mentioned this in a couple of presentations before, but I think it's one of the best examples. So colleges don't know all of the criteria that U.S. News and World Report uses, right? Because then they would just take all those factors and spend all their time and funding and energy on increasing those. But they can make some educated guesses on what the factors are, and some of them they do know. So one of the factors that increases colleges' rankings is the number of Pell-eligible students that they admit. Does anyone know what the Pell program is? The Pell program is a government program that provides a significant grant to students from lower income families. So not just a loan, which is money that you have to eventually give back to the government, but this is a grant, so money that they gift to these families to make college more accessible. So the Pell program is really fantastic, because what it means is that a lot of families that could not afford college, they are given in part a grant by the government, which allows them to afford college, right? So that's fantastic. And so that's the reason that became a factor in the rankings, is because part of the rankings is how do colleges improve accessibility, right, for their students and reduce the amount of student debt. So far that's all really good news, right? But what started happening is colleges realized that the number of Pell-eligible students that they admitted increased their rankings. So what they started to do, college admissions offices, is that was something they looked at. They can see that in an applicant who's eligible for the Pell. And so what ended up happening is you had this really funny graph that started coming out when we looked at admissions data, where you would have tons of Pell-eligible students be admitted, and then a lot of full pay or almost full pay students. Because again, colleges, almost all colleges, with the exception of a few, they can see that financial data. And then there was a big gap in the center, because admitting those students in the middle wasn't increasing their rankings, right? So that was hurting the admissions chances of students that fell in that mid-range, right? And so U.S. News and World Report, colleges, they had to readjust for that. And as that information came out, right, that doesn't look good from a college PR standpoint, and so colleges have had to readjust that. But I just give that as an example of the unintended consequences that can come from rankings, right, and the ways it can really skew even the admissions process. And so from a college standpoint, that's some of the pitfalls, but from a family standpoint, it's the same idea. If all we focus on when we're talking about colleges is ranking, it means that we're neglecting other really important factors and resources that can be used to build a list for students that really fit with their goals for the future. And I'll talk more about that when I talk about the truth, which is that college fit is everything. If you did not come to my presentation on finding your best fit college earlier in the year, I would invite you, send me a message. I recorded that presentation, and I would really encourage you, watch that presentation, because I talk through different categories of schools and what type of student is a good fit and maybe not a good fit for that type of school. Things like size, location, cost, religious affiliation, level of intensity. These are all really critical factors, and when we just look at rankings, we oftentimes miss those differentiated factors that can be really important for students. I went to an admissions presentation recently, and it was all colleges from New York. And they were talking about how, on one hand, when students apply to all of those schools, it makes some sense, right? Because maybe a student says, hey, I really want to go to college in New York, so I'm just going to apply to every school in New York. But on the other hand, when they hear students just listing off the top-ranked colleges in New York, those schools are very different. I don't know if you all have ever been to Columbia's campus or NYU's campus. Those are very, very different college experiences, different college philosophies, and really different students that would benefit from those programs. So when college admissions officers see that it's not just I love New York, it's I'm just applying to the 2 top schools in New York, oftentimes it raises an eyebrow for college admissions officers because they think, does this student really understand our institutions? Are they really thinking about if they would be a good fit? And this is really important. This is one of the things as I work with families that we'll talk about over and over and over again, is the idea of best fit. So what do I mean by best fit? Best fit refers to finding a school that matches your goals for the future and how you want to achieve them. And I'll just use one illustration. There's certainly more. But if you all have read Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath, one of the chapters in the book is dedicated solely to college admissions. And Malcolm Gladwell puts forth this very David and Goliath idea, right, of big fish, small pond, or small fish, big pond. And this particularly is tied to that idea of what type of intensity does a student want in their college admissions process. So what this chapter in the book does is it really talks through a couple students and their college decisions and where they end up falling in the class. Are they in the top 10% of their college class? Are they in the middle 50%? Or are they in the bottom 15% of their class? And the impact that has on where their self-esteem, where they're hired, and all of those pieces. And one of the quotes from the book is what Malcolm Gladwell finds from his research is that candidates that are in the top of their class at non-prestigious colleges have better publication records and better job acceptance than almost everyone who attended an Ivy League school. The only exception was the top 10% of students that attended an Ivy League school. They were the only ones in the research that had better publication rates and better employment rates, right? So Malcolm Gladwell's question is it better to be the big fish in the small pond or the small fish in the big pond? And there is no right or wrong to that. That is truly a question that students should ask. But understanding the intensity of the institution, understanding what it takes to be in the top 10% of a highly selective school It doesn't mean just because you go to that school that your job chances are better. That's not what the research finds. So that's why it's important to reshape this conversation, not on rankings, but on fit. Additionally, it's not just about academics. Some schools, if you look at the banners that I put out front, some of the schools there have a focus on faith. Some have a focus on arts, others athletics. It's important to remember that college is not just a choice about what you want your academic experience to be like, but what you want your living experience to be like for 4 years and in the future. Colleges are asking the question, what do current students and alumni say about their experience? And do we believe that this is a student that would benefit our institution? And students, you should be asking, and families, you should be asking the same question. What is my child's, what is my goal for the future? Back to that best fit. And is this a college that matches my goals and how I want to achieve them? Okay, the next myth is that students should apply to 20 colleges. And I hear this a lot, especially from my seniors, as they're starting to work on the actual number of colleges that they're applying to. And this is why context is so important, right? Over time, as families feel the pressure of the college admissions process, as they feel the pressure of those reduced admissions numbers, students feel like the solution is quantity. The solution is, apply to as many schools as possible because then my chances of getting in go up. And that's not the way it works, right? Each admissions decision is its own separate, discrete process, right? And so it's important to remember that, but it's very easy to fall into the fallacy of, I need to apply to more colleges, and that's because of the news that we see about those acceptance rates dropping. I want to tell you something, which is that data benefits colleges. They want more students to apply. So this idea of apply to more, it's hard to get in, you should apply to more, this actually is very beneficial to the colleges. The reason for that is twofold. One, many colleges have an application fee. And I had a senior that was outraged at the cost of the application fee to the University of California schools. Application fees are normally anywhere between $50, $45 if you're super lucky, all the way up to $85, right? So multiply that by 20, that's a significant chunk of change. But the colleges, many colleges make millions of dollars on application fees every year. So the more students that apply, that is bringing in revenue for the college. But also, and math was not my favorite subject in high school or college, but this is math I can do, which is when when more students apply to your college and the number you admit stays the same, that means your acceptance percentage goes down, right? Because you've increased that bottom number. And so colleges seem more prestigious when they have more students apply. Whether or not those students are really qualified applicants who they would actually consider, it'd be nice if they were, but either way, the colleges get that benefit. And I want to be careful here. I don't mean to characterize colleges in this light of, they're the big bad wolf, right? They are trying to recruit students to their institution, right? And part of the way you do that is name brand recognition. So it comes from that place, but it's important for us as people living through this process to understand the reasons behind these things. So colleges will often encourage students to apply. They'll send them mail, they'll send them letters. And so if you get a letter, even from a school like Princeton or Harvard, that feels exciting and that's awesome. But a lot of kids get those letters. And just remember, there is incentive to the colleges to encourage more and more students to apply. So I said, let's look at the actual data. What is the average number? When I talk to Bear Creek families, I say 6 to 8 is generally the average that Bear Creek students apply to. We certainly have students apply to less, and we certainly have students that apply to more. It is a personalized process, but I also wanted to look at the national data. So I pulled the data from the Common Application, which is where most college applications are submitted through. It's a general platform. And so in 2023, The number of applications received by colleges went up about 30%, right? So colleges are seeing that increase in number. But the average student applied to five and a half colleges. So they just did some very rough math. There's no way to apply to a half college. So we can round up and say about 6 colleges, which is right on track with Bear Creek's numbers. So I mention this because it really is important for students to apply to a range of best fit colleges. Not as many as possible, but a range of best fit colleges. The number is personalized to the student's goals, but students and families should take time to research schools and craft a list that matches their criteria, as opposed to just throwing as many schools as you can onto a list. In addition to the money cost, there's a time cost for families and especially for students. Filling out applications often takes hours. And so it's critical for students to make sure that they're thinking through the schools before applying, not just after they're accepted. Okay, the next myth is that there is a perfect school. And this is one I'm passionate about all of these, but this one is really important to me because I often hear stories of students saying, I just don't feel like any of my schools are perfect. Or I wanted to go onto a campus and have this experience where I said, I knew this was the one. It was love at first sight. I walked onto the campus and it was perfect. It was everything I wanted. And I got in, and I got a scholarship, right? And there are some people who have that experience, and I do not want to negate that. There are some people that just know. They look at a college and they go, this is what I want. This is perfect. But I'd say that's less than 20% of students, maybe even less than 10%. Most students don't find their perfect school. And that's okay, because there really are no perfect schools. Even those students that feel like it's a great fit, it's a great fit. It's not a perfect school. And I just wanted to illustrate that with one piece of data that I found. So when you think about finding your best fit school, finding the perfect school, I would think one thing to consider is how happy the students are on campus. What's their college experience like? Do they report that they love where they go to school? So if we look at the data around what the happiest student bodies are, some of these schools may be familiar to you, and I bet some of them you've heard of, or maybe you haven't. So, and this is aggregated from a couple sources, including the Princeton Review, which is one of sort of the gold standard sources in the college admissions world. So Auburn University, Taylor University, Washington State University, Emory University, and Vanderbilt University. Those are kind of the 5 that come up most frequently from a couple of different data sources. So then I got curious and I thought, I wonder what other websites say that are hyper-focused on encouraging students to apply to as many schools and really driven by rankings. So I pulled it up, one of those websites. And by the way, the other websites, they had sources where they got this data from. You could actually go and see the questions that they had asked from the campus. The other 2 sources that I found, these ones that were really encouraging students to apply to as many colleges as possible and as many selective, they just said it was their feeling about what the top schools were, no data. They said Yale, USC, Duke, Rice, Stanford, Brown, and Emory. So I guess we're all going to Emory because that's the one that's across the 2 lists. But my point in saying that is those are 2 very different sources that came up with very different lists of who the happiest students were and what that looked like. So it's important to remember, if you're looking at even a factor like that, you're not going to find agreement, and that those factors come from asking different questions, and those factors also come depending upon the source and what their goals are. So when we talk about perfect colleges and the fact that there are no perfect colleges, it comes back to the idea of looking for that best fit college. And so how do we do that? What now? There's two really important things that I would encourage you to take away from this presentation. The first is learn about the college process. Coming tonight, you all are a step ahead because you're learning about the process. But there are some great resources. I'll show you some different books and presentations here at Bear Creek, individual advising sessions, ways that you can learn about what this college process is like is super critical. And I would encourage you not to make your primary source of learning your friends, your siblings, your neighbors, or the internet. There are some valuable sources on the internet, but I always tell the students, don't believe everything you see on Reddit and TikTok, right? It is really important to be mindful of well-intentioned misinformation, right? Your neighbor who you're chatting with at the block party, they're not trying to lead you astray on the college process. They're trying to help you. They're trying to relate about this phase of life. But their information may be based on assumptions, maybe based on something they read online, and so it's super important that you do research that is well-informed. Of course, you can still talk to your friends and neighbors and family about this process, but it's just super important to take that extra step to consult with the people that live in this space, right? That do the research, that understand the data, because there are people that are experts in this area or that live in this space, and they're the ones that are going to give you the best, most accurate info. And then the second thing that goes along with that is use your resources. We are so fortunate here at Bear Creek that we have a one-on-one advising process. I get to meet with every single student and every family. I get to know them. I get to know their goals. I have old school files on them because I'm a paper person, but I also have spreadsheets, I promise. And I get to understand and help guide this process. Take advantage of that. Take advantage of, if you're not in 11th or 12th grade, take advantage of Mrs. Promo. She's an amazing academic advisor with a ton of knowledge about how to set up students for success in high school. In addition to the one-on-one sessions, I invite you, come to our events. Students have opportunities through assembly and class time, and then our monthly newsletter. And then for students as well, and sometimes parents want to come to these college visits, but they are not open to parents, unfortunately, just students. But for students in the room and also for parents, the college visits, which are open to all high school students, that's a great way for students to learn about the college process. So here's a few books that I would encourage you to consider reading. My personal favorite, which if you've been to any of my presentations before, you've heard me prattle on about, is Who Gets In and Why? A Year Inside College Admissions. And you will see that Davidson, my alma mater, features heavily in that book. I promise that's not the reason I love it. The reason I love it is that Jeffrey Salingo is a journalist who really got unprecedented access to the admissions review process. Colleges take that very seriously. The exact weight they give each admissions factor, the conversations they have around the table as they're talking about applicants, they don't share that information lightly. So the access that Salingo got to these processes is really hard to get. And so it provides some pretty unique insights into the types of conversations that go on in admissions committee rooms. And then the other one that I really wanted to highlight is the Fisk Guide to Colleges. I have a copy of that out front. That's my copy, so please don't walk off with it, but you can, and I would encourage you to thumb through it. This is a great curated guide to colleges all across the country. So when this process feels overwhelming, when it feels like there's a million colleges to choose from, this is a great starting point for families, And you can find older versions online on Amazon for very cheap, and it doesn't have to be the most up-to-date edition to be useful. The one thing I always caution families, though, is if you're using an older edition, some of the information on scholarships, some of the information on financial aid and cost of attendance, that might be outdated. So just make sure you're looking at the up-to-date numbers on that. But most of the colleges will be the same in the older editions. So as we're wrapping up before our Q&A time today, I want to leave you with a few important reminders. The first is just to reiterate, to re-emphasize, use the resources and support here at Bear Creek. That is what Mrs. Promo and I are here for, and that is what we love doing, is helping support students to become the individual God intends, as is our mission statement here at Bear Creek. And then the second thing is to embrace the journey. This is such a cliche expression, but I love it. The college admissions process, the best way to do it is like eating an elephant, one bite at a time. There's so much to digest. There are so many terms. There's so much information. And I know that because I go through this process every year with families. And so I will work with you every step of the way. I do my best to not overwhelm families, but I also want to make sure that every family understands what the next few months and next few steps are in the process. So if I had to sum it up now for you, middle school students, right now, middle school students should be working hard in school and identifying areas of academic interest. They should also be trying different activities and identifying what they like to do. 9th and 10th graders should be working hard in their classes and taking a diversity of courses and beginning to challenge themselves. In activities, they should start to hone in on what they think are really their most favorite things that they're involved in and start looking for ways to expand and deepen those activities. And then 11th grade, that's when this process really kicks into high gear. 11th graders need to make sure that they're starting to research colleges, they're starting to meet with me, and they're starting to build that best fit college list. And I'm not going to mention the seniors because seniors are applying to colleges, and I told them all, don't come tonight because this presentation will be useless for you. They've already, at this point, all of our seniors have already completed the process of applying, and now they're just waiting for their decisions, which is such an exciting, nerve-wracking too, but an exciting time for our students. So just the only thing I'll say about senior year is that's when the rubber meets the road. That's when the application process actually occurs. I want to leave you with a quotation from a recent presentation that I listened to. This is from a conference that I went to on college admissions and the college advising process. And the keynote speaker was an author named Jess Walter, who's from Spokane, so actually a Washington native. And he had this quotation, and I pulled out my phone and I wrote it down because I thought it was so profound, and I want to share it with you all. He said, so often in our culture, we feel that college is the destination. But college is not the goal. It's not the destination. It is merely a vehicle to get you where you want to go. And I would add, and there are many cars, many colleges that will get you to that desired destination. You are not defined by your college choice. And I love this scripture. I share it often, and I love this translation of it because of how it ties in to the process of colleges. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. And I think it's important to end with that reminder that God is in this process. The Holy Spirit is at work in all of our lives, in all of our students' lives, and that includes this college process. I pray for all of the students, all the seniors, as they embark on this journey, because it's important to me that we leave space for God's work and God's will in each of the students' lives. And how exciting is that to see the Lord at work? So with that, I have left time for Q&A, which is so exciting because sometimes I don't. So I hope you all have some questions. If you want to, just raise your hand, and then I will answer any questions that you all have. Any questions? Yes. That's a really good question. So the question was, since seniors are already applying to college, what about GPA? Is it the junior year that matters? The answer to that is mostly yes. So the first GPA that colleges see for students is their GPA through their junior year. So 9th, 10th, and 11th grade classes. And so all colleges will get that information. And then I'm responsible for sending a mid-year report, which some of the students really don't like, but it's required, which is an updated GPA that I just sent them last week for semester 1 of senior year. So colleges will also look at that information to see how students are continuing to challenge themselves. It can be a real benefit to students if maybe they're kind of on the fence of being admitted or not and they do really well their senior year, or maybe their grades fall off. That could have a negative impact on the admissions decision. But the most critical GPA is that first one, which is through junior year. Yeah. Yeah, so it's a really good question about balancing that rigor and GPA. Which one matters more? If a GPA is higher or rigor is higher, how do the colleges weigh that? So there's a joke, which no one ever laughs when I tell, but it's a college advising joke, which is the college advisor gets asked that question and they say, well, take the hardest classes and get the best grades. That's how you do it. But obviously that's not realistic, right? We all are balancing those things. So what I would encourage you is, colleges will say that they value both things equally. That's not super helpful, right? What I would say as an advisor is you really do want to look at it like two ends of one of those scales. You want to keep it as close to balanced as possible. So, for example, if you're getting straight A's, it might be a good opportunity to take an additional class to challenge yourself. If you're getting an AB average, maybe even a C, you're probably hitting your rigor, right? You're probably at a good place. But it really varies student per student. And so my best answer to you, and my most honest answer is, that's why meeting with the college and academics advisors is so important, because we have data that we use. We have historical data. We have data from the College Board. We have data from teachers. We have a lot of resources that we use to advise students on what classes they should take, on balancing rigor and GPA. And so really taking advantage of the expertise of those of us that do that as our job will help each student make the best decision for themselves, because it is a very personal decision to where the student is at. And then I would just add one teensy tiny thing to that, which is I would encourage you then to listen to that advice, because a lot of times families come in and we give them the advice and then they don't listen to it. And then they come back in 6 months and say, we really wish we'd listened. My kid is super stressed, or my kid's bored and they wish they'd taken another class. That is not to say we get it right every time at all. But it is a partnership, and I would just encourage you, embrace that partnership, because that's the best way to answer that question about balance. Yeah. Yeah, do you have a follow-up? Yeah, so the follow-up question is basically, if you take a hard class and you get an A-, is it worth retaking the class? There's a very easy answer to that: no, I would not retake the class. That shows up on a student's transcript as a no-credit class then, And that would indicate to the colleges the student had basically almost failed the class, which is why they needed to retake it. So you do not want to do that. There are times, and we have students here at Bear Creek, and I have absolutely advised students to retake classes, but it's normally where there's huge content gaps and where they really struggle to pass that course to be successful. So an A- would not be a grade where you would want to see that no credit on a transcript because the previous attempt still shows, because your transcript is a record of what you've taken. Yeah. Yeah, do you have a question?
On Wednesday morning, there is another similar meeting in the library. And is it resolved?
Yes, good question. Wednesday morning, there's a meeting in the library. That is for sophomores, and yes, it will be different. What we'll be talking about is course selection mostly. So what classes students should consider taking for their junior year, how to set themselves up for academic success junior and senior year, and then we'll talk about a timeline. So we didn't talk much about timeline tonight, like letters of recommendation, transcript information, when college lists should be created, all of that stuff. I gave you some rough information, but in that talk on Wednesday, we'll go into depth so families understand really what's coming the junior year, because it's such an important year. So I would encourage you, if you can come, the content will be completely different. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the question is about the college essay. Do we have a system or class? So the answer to that is yes. So all of our 11th grade students write a draft of their college essay. Many colleges actually ask for multiple essays, but that essay is the Common App essay or the main essay or the personal statement. You'll hear it referred to all of those ways. All of our juniors draft a version of that and receive feedback in their junior year English class, whatever English class they take. And then I host workshops throughout the summer to help students revise that essay and write any additional essays that they have. And then I offer editing to students for any written materials. So for some students, they don't take me up on that, which is just fine. But I also have students, seniors this year, where I've read no less than 10 drafts of every single essay they've turned in for colleges. And that is something that's part of what I provide as an advisor. So there's the process all of them do, then there's the summer workshops, and then there's the individual feedback from me as well. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, if a student is interested in like one particular area of study, is that what you mean? Area of study, how to find those colleges. Were you at my Best Fit presentation in the fall? Were you able to come to that? Okay, perfect. So some of the resources in there are a good starting place. Things like the Fisk guide, they break down colleges based on majors. So they'll tell you, like if you want, I was talking to a student today that's really interested in biochemistry. So what are schools that have really awesome biochemistry programs? What are schools that have, we have 2 students this year that are going into undergraduate nursing programs. What colleges have really stellar nursing programs? What colleges have good writing programs? All of those things. So the Fisk guide, the Princeton Review Guide, which is out front as well, and then Naviance as well, which is the platform we pay for as a school. It has a search feature called Supermatch that allows you to filter by majors and programs. And so those are the resources that I would use. You can also use Google. Google is not bad, but you'll find the same top schools over and over and over again. And so those other resources will help diversify a student's list. And then the last resource is, that's why I meet with the students and I put together a preliminary list of schools for each student to research. So that happens the junior year, based on their interests, based on what they want to study. So that's a list of 30 to 40 schools as a launch pad for students to research. And then we continue that process of, no, I like this school, or no, I don't like this school, yes, I like this school. Okay, well then, have you thought about these, et cetera. So that starts the process of me also weighing in and helping. Yeah. All right, we are at time, and so I will stick around for longer to answer any additional questions you have, but I'm cognizant of the weather and that it's very cold and hopefully not too icy tonight. But once again, I want to thank you all so much for coming. I really hope it was helpful and informative tonight. And as I said at the start, I really, my job is such a privilege, and I look forward to continuing to get to know some of you and to get to know some of you and journey this college process with each and every one of you. So thank you so much for your time.